Emma Rodriguez clutched her brown paper bag lunch tighter as she stepped into the elevator at Riverside General Hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across her tired face. She had been working double shifts for 3 months straight, and the weight of exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. What she didn't know was that her simple act of kindness was about to change everything, not just for her, but for the man she thought was just another janitor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air in Minneapolis carried the bitter sting of February cold as Emma Rodriguez pushed through the revolving doors of Riverside General Hospital. Her breath formed small clouds that dissipated quickly in the heated lobby, and she pulled her worn winter coat tighter around her small frame. At 28, Emma carried herself with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned early that life demanded resilience. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and despite the fatigue that seemed permanently etched around her brown eyes, she managed a genuine smile for the security guard at the front desk. Emma had been a registered nurse for 6 years, spending the last 3 working the pediatric wing on the 3rd floor of Riverside General. The work was emotionally demanding, caring for sick children and supporting their frightened families. But it filled her with a sense of purpose that made the long hours bearable. What made them less bearable was the financial pressure that followed her home each night, like an unwelcome shadow. Her mother, Carmen, had been diagnosed with early onset dementia 2 years ago, and the memory care facility where she lived consumed most of Emma's paycheck. The small apartment Emma rented in uptown Minneapolis was modest at best, with thin walls and a heater that worked only when it felt like cooperating. She had learned to layer her clothing even indoors and had become an expert at stretching every dollar until it practically screamed for mercy. Each morning, Emma prepared 2 lunches in her tiny kitchen. One was a simple affair for herself, usually a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, sometimes with a small bag of chips if she was feeling optimistic about her grocery budget. The other lunch was more substantial, a homemade sandwich with real meat and cheese, fresh fruit, perhaps some crackers or cookies she had baked on her day off. She told herself the second lunch was for later in her shift, a reward for making it through another demanding day. The elevator hummed softly as Emma rode up to the 3rd floor, the familiar weight of her nursing bag on one shoulder and her lunch bag on the other. The pediatric wing was already buzzing with activity, even though her shift wouldn't officially start for another 15 minutes. She liked arriving early, using the quiet moments to prepare herself mentally for whatever the day might bring. As she walked down the corridor toward the nurses' station, Emma noticed the floors gleaming under the overhead lights. The pediatric wing was always spotless, thanks to the night cleaning crew who worked tirelessly while most of the hospital slept. She had seen them occasionally during her overnight shifts, quiet figures moving methodically through the halls, with their carts and supplies, ensuring that the environment remained safe and clean for the vulnerable children in their care. Dr. Patricia Williams looked up from a chart as Emma approached the nurses' station. Patricia was a veteran pediatric physician in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering, but never lost their compassion. She had taken Emma under her wing when Emma first joined the pediatric team, recognizing both her clinical skills and her natural ability to connect with young patients. "Morning, Emma," Patricia said, her voice carrying the slight hoarseness that came from long nights in the hospital. "How's your mother doing?" Emma appreciated that Patricia always asked. In a busy hospital environment, personal connections could sometimes get lost in the shuffle of medical procedures and administrative demands, but Patricia made an effort to see her staff as whole people rather than just employees. "She's having more good days lately," Emma replied, though they both knew that with dementia, good days became increasingly precious and rare. The new medication seems to be helping with the anxiety. Patricia nodded, understanding. She had seen too many families navigate the heartbreaking journey of watching a loved one disappear piece by piece. If you ever need to adjust your schedule to spend more time with her, we can work something out. Emma felt a warmth in her chest at the offer, even though she knew she couldn't afford to reduce her hours. Thank you, Dr. Williams. That means a lot. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of medication rounds, vital sign checks, and the countless small tasks that kept the pediatric wing running smoothly. Emma moved between patient rooms with practiced ease, her demeanor shifting seamlessly, from professional efficiency with the medical staff to gentle warmth with the children and their families. In room 304, 8-year-old Tommy Martinez was recovering from appendix surgery. His large brown eyes followed Emma as she checked his IV and recorded his temperature. Tommy had been asking for his father, who worked construction and couldn't afford to take time off during the week. His mother, Sophia, sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "How are you feeling today, champion?" Emma asked Tommy, using the nickname she had given him on his first day. She had learned that small gestures of personalization could make an enormous difference in a child's hospital experience. "My tummy still hurts," Tommy admitted, his voice small and uncertain. Emma sat on the edge of his bed and pulled out her stethoscope. "Let's listen to your breathing, and then I'll see if we can get you something to help with that pain, okay?" As she conducted her examination, Emma noticed Sophia shifting uncomfortably in her chair. The woman had been at the hospital for 3 days straight, and Emma suspected she hadn't been eating regularly. Hospital cafeteria food was expensive, and Emma recognized the signs of a family stretching every resource to manage a medical crisis. "Mrs. Martinez," Emma said gently, "when was the last time you had a proper meal?" Sophia's cheeks flushed slightly. "I'm fine, nurse. I just want to focus on Tommy." Emma had seen this countless times before. Parents who sacrificed their own basic needs while caring for a sick child, as if taking care of themselves somehow meant they were being selfish or neglectful. She made a mental note to check on Sophia later and perhaps find a way to ensure she got something nutritious to eat. The morning shift continued, with its predictable unpredictability. Emma helped Dr. Williams with a procedure on a toddler with pneumonia, comforted a 6-year-old who was afraid of getting blood drawn, and spent 20 minutes on the phone with insurance companies trying to resolve coverage issues for a family whose child needed specialized treatment. By 11 o'clock, Emma's feet were already aching in her comfortable nursing shoes, and she could feel the familiar tension building in her shoulders. She had learned to read her body's signals after years of long shifts, knowing when to pace herself and when to push through discomfort for the sake of her patients. It was during her brief break that Emma first noticed him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was walking past the supply closet near the elevator when she heard a faint sound from inside. It was barely audible, a soft rustling followed by what sounded like someone trying to suppress a cough. Emma paused, her nursing instincts immediately alert to anything that might indicate someone was in distress. The supply closet was typically locked during the day, accessible only to authorized personnel with key cards. Emma tried the handle and found it unlocked, which struck her as unusual. She pushed the door open slowly, not wanting to startle anyone who might be inside. What she saw made her heart constrict with immediate concern. A man sat hunched on a small step stool in the corner of the closet, surrounded by cleaning supplies and medical equipment. He was older, probably in his early 60s, with graying hair that looked like it hadn't been properly washed in several days. His clothes were clean but worn, the uniform of the hospital's janitorial staff, but something about his posture suggested exhaustion that went far beyond the normal fatigue of physical work. In his hands was a small plastic container, the kind that might hold leftovers. He was eating something with a plastic spoon, but from Emma's angle, she couldn't quite see what it was. What struck her most was the way he ate, quickly, almost furtively, as if he was afraid of being discovered. "Excuse me," Emma said softly, not wanting to frighten him. "Are you okay?" The man's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like embarrassment. He was younger than she had initially thought, maybe late 50s, with kind blue eyes that held a depth of weariness she recognized from her own mirror on particularly difficult days. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, starting to stand. "I didn't mean... I was just taking a quick break. I'll get back to work." Emma held up a gentle hand. "No, please don't worry about that. I just wanted to make sure you were feeling all right. You looked like you might not be feeling well." The man, she could see his name tag now, which read Bob, glanced down at the container in his hands. Emma caught a glimpse of what appeared to be crackers, the kind that came in small packages from vending machines. It struck her as an odd lunch for someone who worked physically demanding hours. "I'm fine," Bob said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Just grabbing a quick bite before I finish the third floor." Emma's trained eye took in details that might escape casual observation. Bob's face was thinner than it should be for a man of his build, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't getting adequate rest. His hands, she noticed, had a slight tremor that could indicate low blood sugar, or simply the effects of not eating enough. "When did you last have a real meal?" Emma asked, her voice taking on the gentle but firm tone she used with patients who were reluctant to discuss their symptoms. Bob's eyes darted away from hers. "I ate this morning." Something in his tone made Emma suspect that wasn't entirely true, but she didn't want to push him into a corner. She had learned through years of nursing that sometimes the best way to help someone was to offer assistance without making them feel like they were being interrogated or judged. "I brought an extra lunch today," Emma said, though this wasn't technically true. "Would you mind helping me out by taking it? I always pack too much food and I hate to see it go to waste." Bob looked up at her with surprise, his blue eyes searching her face as if trying to determine whether she was being genuine or simply feeling sorry for him. Emma kept her expression neutral and friendly, the same way she would with a patient who was hesitant to accept help. "I couldn't take your food," Bob said finally. "That's very kind, but I'm okay." Emma nodded as if she understood completely. "I'll tell you what. If you change your mind, I'll leave something in the break room refrigerator with your name on it. No pressure at all." Bob's eyes softened slightly, and Emma thought she detected a hint of gratitude in his expression. That's very thoughtful of you, miss." "Emma," she said, extending her hand. "Emma Rodriguez." "Bob Thompson," he replied, shaking her hand with a grip that was firm despite his apparent fatigue. Emma left the supply closet with her mind racing. Something about Bob's situation didn't sit right with her, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what it was. She had encountered plenty of hospital employees who struggled financially. Healthcare workers were notoriously underpaid given the demanding nature of their work. But there was something about Bob that suggested his circumstances might be more dire than simple budget constraints. During her lunch break, instead of eating the sandwich she had packed for herself, Emma found herself in the hospital cafeteria purchasing a substantial meal: a turkey and Swiss sandwich, a cup of soup, an apple, and a bottle of water. She charged it to her credit card, wincing slightly at the expense, but unable to shake the image of Bob eating crackers in a supply closet. She packaged the food carefully in a brown paper bag and wrote "Bob Thompson" on the outside in her neat handwriting. Then she placed it in the staff refrigerator in the third-floor break room, along with a small note that simply said, "Thank you for keeping our floors so clean, Emma." For the rest of her shift, Emma found herself thinking about Bob. She caught glimpses of him throughout the afternoon, moving quietly through the corridors with his cleaning cart, working with the methodical efficiency of someone who took pride in doing his job well. He nodded to her when their paths crossed, but neither of them mentioned their earlier conversation or the lunch she had left for him. It wasn't until the end of her shift that Emma checked the break room refrigerator. The bag was gone, and in its place was a small folded piece of paper with her name on it. Inside, in careful handwriting, Bob had written simply, "Thank you. That was the best meal I've had in weeks. BT." Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she read the note. The phrase, "best meal I've had in weeks," echoed in her mind as she gathered her things and prepared to leave for the day. She thought about her own modest dinner waiting at home, probably pasta with whatever vegetables she had left in her refrigerator, and realized that what seemed like a simple gesture to her might have been significantly more meaningful. To Bob, as she walked to her car in the hospital parking garage, Emma made a decision that would prove to be far more significant than she could possibly imagine. Tomorrow, she would pack 2 lunches again. One simple meal for herself and one more substantial lunch for Bob. It wasn't much, but it was something she could do, and in Emma's experience, small acts of kindness had a way of mattering more than people realized. What Emma didn't know was that her simple act of compassion had been observed by someone who made it his business to notice how people treated one another when they thought no one was watching. David Chen stood at the window of his temporary office on the 4th floor, a position that gave him a clear view of the parking garage and, more importantly, had allowed him to witness Emma's interaction with Bob earlier that day through the supply closet's small window. David had been visiting Riverside General in his unofficial capacity as owner of the Chen Healthcare Group, the corporation that owned this hospital, along with 12 others across the Midwest. He made these unannounced visits periodically, not to spy on his employees, but to understand how his facilities actually operated at ground level. Too often, he had learned, the view from corporate boardrooms bore little resemblance to the reality experienced by patients and frontline staff. He had been particularly interested in Riverside General because the facility had been struggling financially, and there had been discussions at the corporate level about potential cost-cutting measures. David preferred to see things for himself before making decisions that would affect people's livelihoods and ultimately patient care. What he had observed today intrigued him more than any financial report could. Here was a nurse who was clearly struggling herself. He had done enough research to know that Emma Rodriguez worked double shifts and had significant family medical expenses, yet she had gone out of her way to help a janitor she barely knew. David had watched her purchase food with her own money and had seen the care with which she had packaged it. More importantly, he had noticed that her kindness appeared to be genuine rather than performative. Emma hadn't looked around to see if anyone was watching her good deed. She hadn't mentioned it to her colleagues or posted about it on social media. She had simply seen someone who needed help and had found a way to provide it. David made a mental note to learn more about both Emma Rodriguez and Bob Thompson. In his experience, the character of an organization could often be measured by how its people treated one another when they thought no one important was paying attention. What he had witnessed today suggested that despite its financial challenges, Riverside General might have something more valuable than healthy profit margins: genuine human compassion. As Emma drove home through the snowy streets of Minneapolis, she found herself thinking not about the bills waiting on her kitchen table or the overtime shift she had picked up for the weekend, but about the simple thank you note tucked in her purse. Sometimes, she reflected, the most meaningful connections happened in the most unexpected places. Tomorrow, she decided, She would make sure to pack something extra special for Bob's lunch. Everyone deserved to feel like someone cared about them, and if she could provide that feeling for one person, even in a small way, then perhaps her own struggles were worth it. Neither Emma nor Bob could have imagined that their simple exchange of kindness had set in motion events that would ultimately transform not just their own lives, but the entire culture of Riverside General Hospital. Sometimes, the most profound changes begin with the smallest gestures, and sometimes the people we think we're helping end up being the ones who help us discover what we're truly capable of becoming. The next morning arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made Minneapolis residents question their life choices. Emma's alarm buzzed at 5:30, pulling her from a restless sleep filled with dreams about hospital corridors and empty refrigerators. She padded across the chilly hardwood floor of her apartment, wrapping her robe tighter around her shoulders as she made her way to the kitchen. The small galley kitchen was barely large enough for one person to move around comfortably, but Emma had learned to work efficiently in the cramped space. She pulled ingredients from her sparse pantry and refrigerator, mentally calculating the cost of each item as she assembled two distinctly different meals. For herself, she prepared a simple sandwich with the last of her peanut butter and a banana that was just beginning to develop brown spots. For Bob, she crafted something more substantial: thick slices of honey wheat bread layered with turkey, cheese, lettuce, and a touch of mustard. Accompanied by a bag of pretzels she had been saving for a special occasion and an orange from the small bag she had splurged on at the grocery store. As she wrapped Bob's sandwich in aluminum foil, Emma found herself wondering about his circumstances. There had been something in his eyes yesterday, a combination of gratitude and surprise that suggested he wasn't accustomed to receiving unexpected kindness. She had worked in healthcare long enough to recognize the signs of someone who was struggling, and everything about Bob's demeanor suggested that his difficulties extended far beyond what might be visible on the surface. The drive to Riverside General took longer than usual due to the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Emma navigated the slippery streets carefully, her aging Honda Civic not exactly built for Minnesota winters. The radio played softly in the background, a mix of morning news and weather updates that painted a picture of a city hunkering down against another harsh February day. Emma turned up the heat, though she knew it would take several minutes for the car to warm up properly. Arriving at the hospital, Emma noticed the parking lot hadn't been fully plowed yet, leaving patches of ice that made walking treacherous. She moved carefully across the slick pavement, her thoughts turning to Bob and wondering if he had to commute in these conditions. Many hospital employees, particularly those in support services, couldn't afford to live close to their workplace and often faced long commutes on public transportation or in unreliable vehicles. The hospital lobby was bustling with the usual morning activity. Emma recognized many of the faces she passed, fellow healthcare workers beginning their shifts with the same mixture of determination and caffeine-fueled energy that sustained them through long days. She exchanged quick greetings with Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the emergency department and waved to Carlos from the pharmacy. But her mind was focused on the brown paper bag containing Bob's lunch that rested carefully in her tote bag. The elevator ride to the third floor felt longer than usual, giving Emma time to question her decision. Was she overstepping boundaries by trying to help someone she barely knew? Was Bob's situation really as dire as she suspected, or was she projecting her own financial anxieties onto someone who might simply prefer to eat alone? She pushed these doubts aside as the elevator doors opened. Sometimes, she reminded herself, the best way to help someone was to err on the side of compassion rather than caution. The pediatric wing was already alive with activity despite the early hour. Emma could hear the sound of breakfast trays being distributed and the gentle voices of night shift nurses providing report to the incoming day staff. She made her way to the nurse's station where Maria Santos was finishing up her documentation from the overnight shift. Maria looked up as Emma approached, her dark eyes showing the fatigue that came from caring for sick children through the long night hours. "Morning, Emma. How's the weather out there?" "Slippery," Emma replied, setting down her bags and pulling off her winter coat. "How was the night?" "Quiet, thankfully. Tommy Martinez slept well after we adjusted his pain medication, and the new admission in 308 finally settled down around 3. Her fever broke just before dawn. Maria gathered her papers and stood, stretching muscles that had been tense for 12 hours. "Oh, and maintenance was here late last night, fixing the heating unit in 312. The janitor who was helping them seemed really knowledgeable about the system. Older gentleman, very polite." Emma's attention sharpened. "Was his name Bob?" "I think so, yes. Why do you ask?" "I met him yesterday. He seemed like a nice man." Emma tried to keep her tone casual, but she found herself curious about any additional information regarding Bob's circumstances. Maria nodded absently, already focused on gathering her belongings for the trip home. "He stayed late to help them get the heat working properly. Seemed to really care about making sure the children would be comfortable." After Maria left, Emma spent a few minutes reviewing the patient assignments and checking in with the night shift charge nurse about any concerns or changes in condition. The familiar routine of beginning her shift helped settle her nerves. But she found herself glancing at the clock more frequently than usual, wondering when Bob would arrive for his cleaning duties. It wasn't until mid-morning that Emma caught sight of Bob pushing his cleaning cart down the corridor toward the far end of the pediatric wing. He moved with the same quiet efficiency she had noticed the day before, methodically working his way from room to room. Emma watched him for a moment, noticing the care he took to minimize noise around the patient rooms and the respectful way he stepped aside when medical staff needed to pass in the hallway. During a brief lull in her patient care responsibilities, Emma made her way to the staff break room. The small refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner, and Emma carefully placed the brown paper bag containing Bob's lunch on the middle shelf, positioning it where it would be easily visible. She wrote a simple note on a piece of paper from her pocket. "Hope you have a good day, Emma," and tucked it under the bag. The rest of the morning passed in the typical rhythm of pediatric nursing. Emma administered medications, updated care plans, and spent considerable time with families who were navigating the stress and uncertainty of having a hospitalized child. In room 306, she sat with Mrs. Patterson, whose 4-year-old daughter was recovering from a severe asthma attack. Mrs. Patterson's husband was deployed overseas with the military, leaving her to manage the crisis alone while caring for 2 other children at home. "I just feel so overwhelmed," Mrs. Patterson confided during a quiet moment while her daughter napped. "Everyone keeps telling me how strong I am, but I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding it together." Emma pulled a chair closer to the bedside. This was the part of nursing that didn't appear in job descriptions, but was perhaps the most important aspect of patient care. "Feeling overwhelmed doesn't mean you're not strong," she said gently. "It means you're human. You're dealing with something incredibly difficult, and it's natural to feel that way." Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. "I keep thinking about what would happen if something serious happened to Lily and her father wasn't here. How would I explain that to him? How would I forgive myself?" Emma had heard variations of this conversation countless times, and she knew that the best response wasn't to offer false reassurance or platitudes. Instead, she focused on acknowledging the mother's feelings while providing practical support. "You're here with her now, and that's what matters. You brought her to the hospital when she needed help. You're advocating for her care, and you're providing the comfort and love that only a parent can give. That's not barely holding it together. That's being exactly the mother she needs." These conversations reminded Emma why she had chosen nursing despite the physical demands and emotional toll. Being present with people during their most vulnerable moments was both a privilege and a responsibility that she didn't take lightly. It also reminded her that everyone was fighting battles that might not be visible to others, which reinforced her decision to reach out to Bob. Around noon, Emma found herself walking past the break room and decided to check if Bob had discovered the lunch she had left for him. The refrigerator was nearly empty, except for a few items belonging to other staff members, and the brown paper bag was gone. In its place, tucked under a coffee mug on the counter, was a small folded piece of paper with her name written in the same careful handwriting she had seen the day before. Emma unfolded the note and read, "Dear Emma, I don't have words to express how much your kindness means to me. The sandwich was delicious, and knowing that someone cares enough to think of me made it taste even better. I hope someday I can return the favor. With sincere gratitude, Bob Thompson." The note was written on what appeared to be a piece of paper torn from a small notebook, and the handwriting was precise and educated, suggesting that Bob might have a background that differed from what his current circumstances might indicate. Emma folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the hospital's heating system. During her lunch break, Emma found herself in the hospital cafeteria again, standing in line. Behind Dr. Williams and a respiratory therapist she recognized but didn't know well. The conversation in front of her centered around budget constraints and rumors of potential staff reductions, a topic that had been circulating through the hospital for several weeks. "I heard they're looking at cutting evening custodial staff," the respiratory therapist was saying. "Apparently, they think they can get by with just the overnight crew." Dr. Williams shook her head. "That would be a mistake. The cleanliness standards in a hospital can't be compromised, especially in pediatrics. These decisions are being made by people who don't understand the day-to-day operations." Emma's heart sank as she listened to this conversation. If Bob was part of the evening custodial staff, budget cuts could mean he would lose his job entirely. She thought about his note, the gratitude he had expressed for a simple sandwich, and tried to imagine how devastating job loss would be for someone who was already struggling. She purchased another substantial lunch for Bob, this time adding a cup of the cafeteria's homemade soup and a small package of cookies. The total cost made her wince slightly, but she pushed aside her own financial concerns. If Bob was facing the possibility of unemployment, ensuring he had at least one good meal each day seemed like the least she could do. The afternoon brought a new challenge when 8-year-old Marcus Johnson was admitted with complications from diabetes. Marcus was a frequent patient who Emma had cared for before, a bright child whose family struggled to manage his complex medical needs due to a combination of financial constraints and limited health literacy. Emma spent considerable time with Marcus's grandmother, who served as his primary caregiver, reviewing medication schedules and dietary requirements. "I just get so confused about all these instructions," Mrs. Johnson admitted, looking at the discharge papers from Marcus's previous admission. "The doctors use so many big words, and I want to do right by him, but sometimes I feel like I'm in over my head." Emma sat down with Mrs. Johnson and went through each medication and instruction carefully, using simple language and encouraging questions. She knew that taking the time for thorough patient education could prevent future complications and readmissions, but it was also the right thing to do for a family that was clearly doing their best under difficult circumstances. As the afternoon progressed, Emma found herself thinking about the various ways that people struggled and supported each other within the hospital environment. Mrs. Johnson caring for Marcus despite her own limitations, Mrs. Patterson managing her daughter's illness while her husband was deployed, Bob working diligently to maintain a clean environment for healing while facing his own challenges. Each person was fighting their own battle, yet they were all connected by their presence in this place, dedicated to healing and hope. It was during the evening shift change that Emma encountered Bob again. She was walking toward the elevator, ready to head home after another long day, when she saw him emerging from a patient room with his cleaning supplies. He moved slowly, as if each step required considerable effort, and Emma noticed that his uniform shirt appeared looser than it had the day before. "Hi, Bob," she said, as their paths crossed near the nurse's station. Bob looked up and his face immediately brightened with a genuine smile that transformed his entire appearance. "Emma, I was hoping I might see you before you left." He glanced around to make sure they weren't blocking traffic in the busy corridor. "I wanted to thank you again for the lunch. And the soup was incredible. It reminded me of something my wife used to make." The mention of his wife was casual, but Emma caught the past tense and wondered about the story behind it. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. You work so hard to keep this place clean and safe for our patients. It's the least I can do." Bob's eyes grew misty, and he cleared his throat softly. "You have no idea what it means to me. Really. I was wondering." No, he hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "Would it be too much trouble if I asked for your advice about something?" Emma checked her watch and realized she had a few minutes before she needed to leave to avoid the worst of rush hour traffic. "Of course. Would you like to sit down somewhere and talk?" Bob nodded gratefully, and they made their way to a small seating area near the elevator bay that was typically used by families waiting for news about their loved ones. The chairs were institutional but comfortable, and the area was relatively quiet despite the hospital's ongoing activity. "I'm not sure how to say this without sounding like I'm complaining," Bob began, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "But I've been going through a difficult time lately, and I'm not sure what my options are." Emma waited patiently, recognizing that sometimes people needed time to find the right words for difficult topics. "I lost my house about 6 months ago," Bob continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had a small business, home repairs and maintenance, but when I got sick and couldn't work for a while, everything fell apart. The medical bills, the missed income, the mortgage payments, it all just snowballed faster than I could keep up with." Emma felt her heart constrict with sympathy. She had seen how quickly medical crises could devastate families financially, even those who thought they were prepared for unexpected challenges. "I've been living in my truck for the past 3 months, Bob continued. "I park in different places so I don't get hassled by police, and I clean up in the gym at the community center when I can afford the day pass. This job at the hospital has been a lifeline. But I heard rumors today about possible layoffs, and I'm terrified of what will happen if I lose this income." Emma listened carefully, her mind racing with the implications of what Bob was telling her. Living in a vehicle during a Minnesota winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it was genuinely dangerous. The temperatures had been well below freezing for weeks, and even with the truck's heater, the conditions would be nearly unbearable for extended periods. "Have you looked into any assistance programs?" Emma asked gently. "There are organizations that help people who are experiencing homelessness, especially during the winter months." Bob nodded. "I've tried several places, but the waiting lists are long and many of the shelters are full. Some of them have requirements that I don't meet, like being able to prove local residency or passing background checks that take weeks to process." He paused, looking embarrassed. "I also have some pride issues, I guess. I keep thinking I should be able to figure this out on my own." Emma understood the complex emotions that often prevented people from seeking help. The same pride that had motivated Bob to work hard and build a business now made it difficult for him to accept assistance when circumstances beyond his control had derailed his life. "There's nothing wrong with needing help," Emma said softly. "We all need support sometimes, just in different ways. The fact that you're working so hard to maintain your independence and dignity while dealing with these challenges shows incredible strength." Bob's eyes filled with tears that he quickly wiped away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dump all of this on you. You've already been so kind, and here I am burdening you with my problems." "You're not burdening me," Emma replied firmly. "I asked because I care about what happens to you. And maybe there are some resources I can help you find. I know people in social services, and I've worked with families who have faced similar situations." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the evening shift nurses, and Emma realized she needed to leave soon to avoid getting caught in heavy traffic. But she didn't want to end the conversation abruptly, especially when Bob had just shared something so personal and difficult. "Can we continue this conversation tomorrow?" Emma asked. "I'd like to do some research tonight and see what options might be available. And in the meantime, please don't worry about the lunches. I want to make sure you're eating properly, especially with everything else you're dealing with." Bob's expression shifted between gratitude and something that looked like amazement. "I don't understand why you're being so generous to someone you barely know." Emma considered her response carefully. "Because everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness, regardless of their circumstances. And because I believe that when we take care of each other, we create the kind of world we all want to live in." As Emma drove home through the darkening streets of Minneapolis, her mind was filled with thoughts about Bob's situation and what she might be able to do to help. She thought about the note in her pocket, the gratitude in his voice, and the devastating reality of someone living in a truck during one of the harshest winters on record. More than that, she thought about the conversation they had just shared and how Bob's trust in confiding his circumstances to her felt like both a privilege and a responsibility. Emma had always believed that nursing was about more than medical procedures and medication administration. It was about seeing people as whole human beings with complex lives and challenges that extended far beyond their immediate health concerns. When she arrived at her apartment, Emma immediately went to her laptop and began researching resources for people experiencing homelessness in Minneapolis. She found several organizations that provided emergency shelter, meal programs, and assistance with housing applications. But as Bob had indicated, many had waiting lists or specific eligibility requirements that might not match his situation. Emma also found information about programs specifically designed for people who were employed but homeless, recognizing that having a job didn't necessarily guarantee stable housing, especially for those recovering from financial crises. She printed out several pages of information, thinking about how she could present the options to Bob without making him feel like she was trying to manage his life. As she prepared her own simple dinner of pasta and canned sauce, Emma found herself planning Bob's lunch for the next day. She decided to make something that would be filling and comforting, perhaps a hearty sandwich and some of the homemade soup she had been planning to make for herself over the weekend. The cost was adding up, but Emma pushed aside her own budget concerns. Some things were more important than strict adherence to financial plans. Before going to bed, Emma spent time thinking about the broader implications of what she had learned about Bob's situation. How many other hospital employees were struggling in ways that weren't visible to their colleagues? How many people in her community were working full-time jobs while facing housing insecurity or food uncertainty? The questions were overwhelming, but they reinforced her belief that small acts of kindness and connection could make a meaningful difference in individual lives, even when the larger systemic problems seemed insurmountable. Emma set her alarm for an earlier time than usual, wanting to have extra time in the morning to prepare a particularly good lunch for Bob and to organize the resource information she had gathered. As she settled into bed, she reflected on how A simple decision to share her lunch had led to a deeper understanding of someone else's struggles and had opened up possibilities for more meaningful help. What Emma didn't know was that her conversation with Bob had been partially overheard by David Chen, who had been visiting patients on the pediatric floor as part of his ongoing assessment of the hospital's operations. David had been struck not only by Emma's compassion, but by her thoughtful approach to helping someone in need. Rather than offering empty sympathy or quick fixes, she had listened carefully and was clearly planning to provide practical assistance. David had also noted Bob's mention of potential layoffs and made a mental note to investigate the current staffing plans for custodial services. If budget cuts were indeed being considered, he wanted to understand the reasoning behind them and whether there might be alternative approaches that wouldn't result in job losses for dedicated employees like Bob. As David prepared to leave the hospital that evening, he found himself thinking about the conversation he had witnessed and the broader questions it raised about how organizations treat their employees during financial challenges. He had built his healthcare company on the principle that taking care of staff was essential to providing quality patient care, but he recognized that this philosophy was sometimes tested when economic pressures mounted. The following morning would bring new developments that would test Emma's commitment to helping Bob, while also revealing information that would surprise everyone involved in ways they could never have anticipated. Sometimes the most profound changes in people's lives begin with the simplest human connections, and sometimes the people we think we're helping turn out to be the ones who help us discover what we're truly capable of becoming. The following Wednesday brought news that sent ripples of anxiety through every department at Riverside General Hospital. Emma arrived at work to find clusters of staff members huddled in quiet conversations, their faces bearing the unmistakable expressions of people who had just received troubling information. The usually cheerful atmosphere of the pediatric wing felt subdued, as if a heavy blanket of uncertainty had settled over the entire floor. Dr. Patricia Williams intercepted Emma before she could reach the nurses' station, her expression grave. "Have you heard about the announcement?" Emma's stomach dropped. "What announcement?" Administration called an all-staff meeting for this afternoon. Apparently, there are going to be significant budget cuts across multiple departments. Patricia lowered her voice. "The rumor is that they're eliminating several positions in environmental services, dietary, and potentially some nursing support roles." Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she thought immediately of Bob. Environmental Services was the formal name for the custodial department, and if the rumors were true, his position could be among those eliminated. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but Patricia noticed her reaction. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Patricia observed. "Are you worried about your position?" "Because as far as I know, direct patient care nursing isn't on the chopping block." Emma shook her head. "It's not about me. There are just so many good people working here who depend on their jobs." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes we don't realize how much individual employees are struggling until something like this happens." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "You're right about that. I've been here long enough to see how these budget cuts ripple through people's lives in ways that never show up in the financial projections." The morning shift felt different from usual. Emma found herself distracted during routine tasks, her mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Bob and how devastating job loss would be for someone already living in such precarious circumstances. She made more frequent trips past areas where she might encounter him, hoping to have a chance to warn him about the impending announcement. But his cleaning schedule seemed different today. During her break, Emma decided to seek out information more directly. She made her way to the basement level where the Environmental Services Office was located, an area of the hospital she rarely visited. The fluorescent lighting was harsher down here, and the concrete floors echoed with every footstep. She passed storage rooms filled with cleaning supplies and medical equipment, following signs that eventually led her to a small office marked Environmental Services Supervisor. The door was open, and Emma could see a middle-aged woman with graying hair sitting behind a desk covered with paperwork and a computer screen displaying what appeared to be schedules and employee lists. The woman looked up as Emma approached, her expression curious but friendly. "Can I help you? You look lost." Emma stepped into the doorway. "Hi, I'm Emma Rodriguez from the pediatric wing. I was wondering if I could ask you about one of your employees." The woman's expression became more guarded. "What kind of question? Is there a problem with cleaning services on your floor?" "Oh no, nothing like that," Emma said quickly. "Actually, it's the opposite. There's a custodian named Bob Thompson who does excellent work on our floor, and I wanted to make sure you knew how much the nursing staff appreciates his attention to detail and his consideration for our patients." The supervisor's expression softened slightly. "Bob Thompson. Yes, he's one of our newer employees. Started about 4 months ago. He does good work, very thorough." She paused, studying Emma's face. "Is there something specific you wanted me to know about his performance?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to share without betraying Bob's trust. "I just wanted to make sure that his dedication to the job was recognized. He's always very careful around the patient rooms, and he clearly takes pride in maintaining a clean environment for healing." The supervisor nodded slowly. "I appreciate you taking the time to come down here and say that. We don't often get positive feedback from the clinical staff." She glanced at her computer screen. "Though I have to be honest with you, with the budget situation we're facing, positive feedback might not be enough to save positions." Emma's heart sank, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "Are the rumors true about cuts to environmental services?" The supervisor looked around as if to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I probably shouldn't be discussing this before the official announcement, but since you took the trouble to come down here," she lowered her voice, "they're talking about eliminating the evening shift entirely and having the night crew cover both shifts. It would mean losing about 6 positions." Emma felt sick. When would this take effect? If it happens, probably within the next 2 weeks. They want to implement the changes before the end of the fiscal quarter. The supervisor's expression was sympathetic. "I wish I had better news. Bob seems like a decent man, and I hate to see anyone lose their job, especially during winter." Emma thanked the supervisor and made her way back to the elevator, her mind racing with the implications of what she had learned. 2 weeks wasn't much time for Bob to find alternative employment, especially given his current living situation and the challenges he faced in presenting himself as a stable job candidate. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of patient care activities, but Emma's thoughts remained focused on Bob's predicament. During lunch, instead of going to the cafeteria, she sat in her car in the parking garage and made phone calls to several of the organizations she had researched the night before. Most of the conversations were frustrating, confirming what Bob had already told her about waiting lists and eligibility requirements. However, her call to Minneapolis Crisis Housing Services yielded some potentially useful information. The intake coordinator explained that they had a rapid rehousing program specifically designed for employed individuals who were experiencing temporary homelessness. The program could provide emergency motel vouchers for up to 2 weeks while helping participants find permanent housing solutions. "The key requirement is stable employment," the coordinator explained. "If someone loses their job while they're in the program, it becomes much more complicated." Emma made careful notes about the application process and requirements, thinking that this might at least provide Bob with a temporary solution if he could apply before any potential job loss became official. She also gathered information about emergency winter shelters and meal programs, creating a comprehensive list of resources that she could share with him. The afternoon brought the promised all-staff meeting held in the hospital's main auditorium. Emma had attended similar meetings before, but the atmosphere this time felt particularly tense. Hospital employees from every department filled the seats, their conversations creating a low hum of anxiety that seemed to permeate the entire space. Hospital Administrator Margaret Foster took the podium, her expression professionally neutral, but lacking the warmth that usually characterized her interactions with staff. She was followed by the Chief Financial Officer and the Director of Human Resources, a lineup that immediately signaled the serious nature of the announcement. "Thank you all for being here," Foster began. "I know there have been rumors circulating about potential changes, and I want to address those directly rather than allow speculation to continue." She launched into a presentation about the hospital's financial challenges, citing decreased reimbursement rates from insurance companies, increased costs for medical supplies and equipment, and the ongoing impact of recent healthcare policy changes. The numbers and graphs displayed on the screen painted a picture of an institution struggling to maintain financial viability while continuing to provide quality patient care. After extensive analysis and consultation with department heads, Foster continued, "we have determined that some operational adjustments are necessary to ensure the long-term sustainability of Riverside General." Emma listened with growing dread as Foster outlined the specific changes. The evening environmental services shift would indeed be eliminated, affecting 6 employees. Several dietary positions would be cut, with remaining staff expected to cover additional responsibilities. 3 administrative positions would be eliminated through a combination of layoffs and early retirement offers. "We understand that these changes will be difficult for the affected employees and their families," Foster acknowledged. "Human Resources will be working individually with each person to provide information about severance packages, assistance with job placement, and continuation of benefits where possible." The questions from the audience were predictably focused on job security, patient safety implications, and the timeline for implementation. Emma barely heard the responses, her mind occupied with thoughts of how she would break this news to Bob, and what options she could offer him. After the meeting ended, Emma made her way back to the pediatric wing, where the mood among her colleagues reflected the general atmosphere of uncertainty that now pervaded the hospital. Conversations were subdued, and even routine tasks seemed to be performed with less energy than usual. It was during the early evening, as Emma was completing her documentation for the day, that she finally encountered Bob. He was cleaning the nurse's station area, working with the same methodical care she had always observed, apparently unaware of the day's announcement. Emma's heart ached as she watched him, knowing that his current routine and sense of stability were about to be shattered. "Hi, Bob," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up with the same genuine smile she had come to expect, his face brightening at the sight of her. "Emma, I was hoping I'd see you today. I wanted to thank you again for yesterday's lunch. That homemade soup was exactly what I needed on such a cold day." Emma felt a lump forming in her throat. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. Bob, do you have a few minutes to talk? There's something important I need to discuss with you." Bob's expression shifted, reading the seriousness in her tone. "Of course. Is everything all right?" Emma glanced around the busy corridor and gestured toward the same seating area where they had talked the day before. "Let's sit down somewhere more private." As they walked toward the quieter area, Emma tried to organize her thoughts about how to deliver news that she knew would be devastating. She had broken difficult news to families countless times in her nursing career, but this felt different, somehow more personal and immediate. They settled into the chairs, and Emma noticed that Bob's hands were already clasped tightly in his lap, as if he was bracing himself for bad news. His intuition about the serious nature of their conversation was clearly accurate. "Bob, there was an announcement today about budget cuts at the hospital," Emma began, deciding that directness would be kinder than prolonging his anxiety. "I'm afraid the evening environmental services shift is being eliminated." She watched as the color drained from Bob's face and his shoulders seemed to collapse inward. For a moment he said nothing, simply staring at his hands while processing the information. "When?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Within the next 2 weeks. I'm so sorry, Bob. I know how much this job means to you, and I know how difficult this must be to hear." Bob was quiet for a long moment, and Emma could see him struggling to maintain his composure. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his expression held a resignation that suggested he had been expecting something like this to happen. "I suppose I should have seen it coming," he said quietly. "Things have been too good to last. I finally find steady work, and now—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Emma leaned forward in her chair. "Bob, I've been doing some research, and there are resources available that might help. I know this feels overwhelming right now, but there are options we can explore." She pulled out the information she had gathered, spreading the papers on the small table between them. "There's a rapid rehousing program that provides temporary accommodation for people who are employed but experiencing homelessness. If you apply before your job officially ends, you might be eligible for emergency housing assistance while you look for new employment." Bob examined the papers with the careful attention of someone who understood that these documents might represent his lifeline. "This says there's an application process. How long does that usually take?" "I called them today, and they said emergency applications can be processed within 48 hours if all the required documentation is provided." Emma pointed to the specific requirements listed on one of the pages. "You'll need proof of employment, identification, and a statement of your current housing situation." Bob nodded slowly, but Emma could see the doubt in his expression. "Even if I get temporary housing, I'll still need to find another job quickly, and with my current situation." He gestured vaguely at his appearance and circumstances. "It's not easy to present yourself as a reliable job candidate when you're living in your truck." Emma had anticipated this concern. That's where the temporary housing could make a real difference. If you have a stable address and access to shower facilities, it becomes much easier to conduct a proper job search. "And I've been thinking about other possibilities too." She pulled out another set of papers. "I looked into healthcare facilities throughout the Twin Cities area, and several hospitals and nursing homes are currently hiring for environmental services positions. Your experience here at Riverside General would be a strong reference, especially with the positive feedback I know you've received from department supervisors." Bob's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of hope since their conversation had begun. "You think I might be able to find something else fairly quickly?" "I think your work ethic and attention to detail are exactly what other healthcare facilities are looking for," Emma replied with conviction. "And I'd be happy to provide a reference about your professionalism and the quality of your work on our floor." The offer seemed to surprise Bob. "You would do that for me?" "Of course I would. Bob, you're not just someone I've shared a few lunches with. You're a colleague who takes pride in contributing to patient care, even though your role might not always be recognized as part of the healthcare team. I've seen how carefully you work around patient rooms, how respectful you are with families, and how dedicated you are to maintaining a clean and safe environment. Those qualities are valuable, and they deserve to be recognized." Bob's eyes filled with tears that he no longer tried to hide. I don't know what I did to deserve your kindness, Emma. Most people in my situation become invisible to the world, but you've treated me like I matter. Emma felt her own eyes growing misty. You do matter, Bob. Your circumstances don't define your worth as a person, and they don't diminish the contributions you make to this hospital and to patient care. They spent the next half hour going through the various resources Emma had compiled, with Bob asking thoughtful questions about application processes, timelines, and requirements. Emma was struck by his intelligence and his methodical approach to problem solving, qualities that reinforced her belief that his current circumstances were temporary setbacks rather than permanent limitations. As their conversation continued, Emma found herself sharing more about her own challenges and motivations. She told Bob about her mother's dementia and the financial strain of care facility costs, about working double shifts to make ends meet, and about the satisfaction she found in helping others despite her own struggles. I think that's why I was drawn to help you, she explained. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I recognize the strength it takes to keep going when things seem impossible. I see how hard you work, how much you care about doing a good job, and how gracefully you handle circumstances that would defeat a lot of people. Bob listened intently, and when Emma finished speaking, he was quiet for a moment before responding. You know, in all the months I've been struggling with this situation, you're the first person who has talked to me like I'm still the same person I was before I lost everything. Most people, when they learn about my circumstances, they either avoid me entirely or they speak to me like I'm a child who needs to be managed. Emma nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. People sometimes think that showing sympathy means treating someone as if they're helpless, but real compassion means recognizing that difficult circumstances don't change who someone is at their core. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of David Chen, who appeared in the seating area carrying a clipboard and wearing the business casual attire that marked him as someone from administration. Emma and Bob both looked up, uncertain about whether they were supposed to be using this space for personal conversations. Excuse me, David said politely. I don't mean to interrupt, but I was looking for Bob Thompson. The environmental services supervisor told me I might find him up here. Bob immediately stood, his posture shifting into the deferential stance of an employee being approached by management. That's me, sir. Is there something wrong? David smiled reassuringly. Nothing wrong at all. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you about your work here at the hospital. I've been conducting some operational assessments, and your name has come up several times in positive contexts. Emma felt a flicker of curiosity about who this man was and why he would be seeking out Bob specifically, especially on the same day as the layoff announcements. She gathered the papers she had been sharing with Bob, preparing to leave them alone for what appeared to be a work-related conversation. Actually, David continued, I'd like to speak with both of you, if you have a few more minutes. Ms. Rodriguez, I believe I've heard some very positive things about your work as well. Emma exchanged a glance with Bob, both of them clearly uncertain about what this unexpected encounter might mean. David's demeanor was friendly and professional, but there was something about his presence that suggested this was not a routine administrative check-in. I understand there was an announcement today about budget cuts. David continued, his tone becoming more serious. And I know that affects your position, Mr. Thompson. I was hoping to discuss some alternatives that might be available. Bob's expression shifted from confusion to cautious hope. Alternatives? David nodded. Why don't we sit down and I'll explain what I have in mind. I think you'll find the possibilities more encouraging than the news you received today. As they settled back into their chairs, Emma found herself wondering who David Chen was and why he seemed to have detailed knowledge about both her work and Bob's situation. His appearance in this moment felt almost too coincidental. but his manner suggested genuine concern rather than corporate damage control. "First," David began, "I want you both to know that I've been observing operations throughout the hospital for the past several weeks, and I've been particularly impressed by the level of care and dedication I've witnessed on the pediatric floor." He turned to Emma. "Ms. Rodriguez, your nursing supervisors speak very highly of your clinical skills. But what I've noticed goes beyond technical competence. You treat every patient and family member with genuine compassion, and you extend that same respect to colleagues throughout the hospital, regardless of their position or department." Emma felt herself blushing slightly, uncertain how to respond to unexpected praise from someone she didn't recognize. "Thank you, but that's just part of doing the job well." David smiled. "Actually, that's exactly my point. You see, compassionate patient care is inseparable from respectful treatment of everyone who contributes to the hospital's mission. That perspective is rarer than you might think." He turned to Bob. "And Mr. Thompson, I've observed your work throughout the hospital, not just on the pediatric floor. Your attention to detail is exceptional. But more importantly, you understand that environmental services is an integral part of patient care. I've watched you modify your cleaning routine to accommodate sleeping patients, and I've seen you take extra time to ensure that high-touch surfaces in isolation rooms are properly disinfected." Bob looked surprised and pleased by the specific observations. "I try to remember that everything we do here affects patient outcomes in some way." David nodded approvingly. "Exactly. And that understanding of how individual roles contribute to the larger mission is what distinguishes good employees from exceptional ones." Emma found herself growing more curious about David's identity and the purpose of this conversation. His knowledge of their work seemed too detailed for a casual observer, and his tone suggested that this meeting had been planned rather than accidental. "I'm sorry," Emma interjected politely, "but could you help me understand who you are and why you've been observing our work? I don't mean to be rude, but this feels like more than a routine evaluation." David's expression became more serious, and he paused for a moment as if considering how much to reveal. "You're absolutely right to ask. I should have introduced myself more clearly from the beginning." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Emma. Emma read the card aloud, her voice rising in surprise. "David Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Chen Healthcare Group." She looked up at David with wide eyes. "You're the owner of the hospital chain." Bob's face went pale, and he started to stand as if preparing to leave quickly. "Sir, I had no idea who you were. If I said anything inappropriate..." David gestured for Bob to remain seated. "Please don't worry about that. And please call me David. I visit our facilities regularly without announcing myself because I want to see how things really operate, not how they look when everyone is prepared for an inspection." Emma felt a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "So you've been watching us without our knowledge?" David nodded, understanding her concern. "I know that might feel uncomfortable, but I've found that the most accurate assessment of an organization's culture comes from observing how people behave when they think no one important is watching. What I've seen from both of you over the past several weeks has been remarkable." He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more earnest. "Ms. Rodriguez, I've watched you share your lunch with Mr. Thompson every day, and I've observed the respect and dignity with which you've treated him. More importantly, I've seen that your kindness appears to be genuine rather than performative. You're not doing it for recognition or to impress anyone. You're doing it because you believe it's the right thing to do." Emma felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and uncertainty. "I don't understand what this has to do with hospital operations." David smiled. "It has everything to do with hospital operations. The way employees treat each other especially across different departments and job levels, reflects the fundamental culture of an organization. When I see a nurse taking care of a custodian, it tells me that this is a place where people understand that everyone's contribution matters. He turned back to Bob. And, Mr. Thompson, I've been particularly interested in your situation because it represents something I've seen too often in healthcare organizations. Dedicated employees who face personal crises through no fault of their own, and who continue to work with professionalism and pride despite circumstances that would overwhelm many people. Bob looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm just trying to do my job, sir." "David, I know you are, and the fact that you've maintained such high standards while dealing with homelessness and job insecurity speaks to your character and your commitment to the patients we serve." David paused, looking at both of them carefully. "Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you both today. The budget cuts that were announced today are necessary from a financial standpoint, but I don't believe they have to result in the loss of valuable employees like Mr. Thompson." Emma felt a spark of hope. "What do you mean?" David's expression became more businesslike, though his tone remained warm. "I'm prepared to offer Mr. Thompson a position with our facilities management company, which contracts services to all of our hospitals. It would mean a slight increase in pay, full benefits, and most importantly, job security that isn't subject to individual hospital budget fluctuations." Bob stared at David in disbelief. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a career opportunity," David corrected. "Someone with your skills and work ethic could advance within the organization, potentially moving into supervisory or training roles. We're always looking for people who understand that facilities management in healthcare settings requires a higher level of professionalism and attention to detail than most commercial cleaning operations." Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Bob's expression transform from shock to cautious hope to something approaching joy. "That's incredible news, Bob." David held up a hand. "There's more. The position would be based here at Riverside General, so you wouldn't have to relocate or adjust to a new facility. And I'm prepared to provide a signing bonus that should help with immediate housing needs while you transition to stable employment." Bob's eyes filled with tears, and his voice shook slightly when he spoke. "I don't know what to say. This morning I thought I was going to lose everything, and now—" He trailed off, seemingly overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of his fortunes. David's expression softened. "You don't have to say anything except yes, if you're interested in the position." "Yes," Bob said immediately, then laughed through his tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." David smiled and turned to Emma. "Ms. Rodriguez, I have a proposition for you as well, if you're interested in hearing it." Emma looked at him with surprise. "For me?" "I've been looking for someone to lead a new patient advocacy initiative across our hospital system. Someone who understands that quality healthcare extends beyond clinical procedures to include the human dignity and emotional well-being of patients, families, and staff." David paused. "Based on what I've observed of your approach to nursing and your interactions with colleagues, I think you would be perfect for this role." Emma felt stunned. "I don't understand. You're offering me a different job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to expand your impact beyond direct patient care to systemic change that could affect thousands of patients and families across our healthcare network," David explained. "The position would involve developing programs, training staff, and ensuring that compassionate care becomes embedded in our organizational culture rather than left to individual initiative." Emma's mind raced with the implications of what David was proposing. "Would I still be working with patients?" "You would be working for patients," David clarified, "but in a broader capacity. You'd be helping to ensure that every patient throughout our system receives the kind of respectful, compassionate care that you provide naturally." Emma looked at Bob, who was beaming with an expression of joy she had never seen from him before, and then back at David. "I'm honored by the offer, but I need to understand something. Why are you doing this? Why now?" David's expression became more serious. "Because I've learned that the culture of an organization is determined by the actions of individuals, and both of you have demonstrated the kind of values I want to see reflected throughout our healthcare system. Ms. Rodriguez, your daily kindness to Mr. Thompson might seem like a small gesture, but it represents something much larger about how we should treat one another." He gestured toward Bob. "And Mr. Thompson, your dedication to maintaining high standards, despite personal challenges, shows the kind of resilience and professionalism that our industry needs. I don't want to lose either of you because of budget constraints or lack of recognition for your contributions." Emma felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. This doesn't feel real. This morning, everything seemed normal. And now you have the opportunity to make your kindness and compassion part of something bigger, David finished. Both of you do. Agree. As the three of them sat in the quiet seating area, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of the hospital, Emma reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed in the course of a single conversation. What had begun as her simple desire to help a colleague had somehow evolved into opportunities that none of them could have imagined. Bob reached over and took Emma's hand, his eyes bright with gratitude and something that looked like amazement. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "If you hadn't shown me kindness when I needed it most, if you hadn't treated me like I was worth caring about, I don't think I would have survived what was coming." Emma squeezed his hand, feeling her own eyes fill with tears. "You saved mine too, Bob. You reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place, and you showed me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply see each other as human beings who deserve dignity and respect." David watched their exchange with a satisfaction that came from witnessing the power of human connection to transform lives and create opportunities for positive change. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important business decisions weren't about financial projections or operational efficiency, but about recognizing and nurturing the values that made organizations worth leading and worth working for. 2 weeks later, Emma stood in the hallway of Riverside General Hospital, but everything around her had transformed in ways she was still struggling to comprehend. The morning sunlight streaming through the large windows seemed brighter somehow, illuminating a workspace that felt both familiar and entirely new. She wore the same scrubs she had always worn, carried the same nursing bag, and walked the same corridors. Yet her perspective on everything had shifted fundamentally. The patient advocacy office that David Chen had established for her was located on the 4th floor, in a space that had previously been used for storage. The renovation had been completed with remarkable speed, transforming the cluttered room into a warm, welcoming environment where patients, families, and staff members could come to discuss concerns, seek resources, or simply find someone who would listen without judgment. Emma had insisted on keeping the space simple and accessible, rather than intimidating or overly formal. Her new role had officially begun just 3 days earlier, but Emma was already discovering that the position was both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated. Rather than focusing on individual patient care, she was now responsible for identifying systemic issues that affected patient experience across the entire hospital and developing solutions that could be implemented throughout the Chen Healthcare Group network. The transition had not been without its difficulties. Emma found herself navigating administrative responsibilities she had never encountered as a bedside nurse, learning about hospital policies and procedures from a completely different perspective, and working with department heads who were sometimes resistant to changes that challenged established routines. However, the skills she had developed as a pediatric nurse served her well in this new role, particularly her ability to listen carefully to people's concerns and her talent for finding creative solutions to complex problems. Emma's first major initiative had grown directly out of her experience with Bob Thompson and her observation that many hospital employees were struggling with challenges that affected their ability to provide optimal patient care. She had proposed the development of an employee assistance program that would provide confidential resources for staff members facing financial hardship, housing insecurity, mental health challenges, or other personal crises that could impact their work performance and overall well-being. David Chen had enthusiastically supported the proposal, recognizing that taking care of employees was essential to maintaining high standards of patient care. The program would include emergency financial assistance, counseling services, housing, resources, and career development opportunities, all designed to help staff members overcome temporary setbacks and continue contributing to the hospital's mission. Emma had spent her first week in the new role conducting interviews with employees from every department, gathering information about the challenges they faced and the types of support that would be most helpful. The conversations had been eye-opening, revealing the extent to which personal struggles affected people's professional lives and their ability to provide compassionate care to patients. She had spoken with single mothers who were struggling to afford childcare while working irregular shifts, recent immigrants who were having difficulty navigating healthcare benefits and housing systems, older employees who were caring for aging, parents while managing their own health concerns, and younger staff members who were overwhelmed by student loan debt and the high cost of living in Minneapolis. Each story had reinforced Emma's belief that supporting employees was not just an act of kindness, but a strategic investment in the quality of patient care. The most rewarding aspect of her new position was the opportunity to connect people with resources and support that could make a meaningful difference in their lives. Emma had already helped 3 employees access emergency housing assistance, connected 2 staff members with mental health counseling services, and worked with the Human Resources Department to develop more flexible scheduling options for employees with caregiving responsibilities. However, it was her ongoing relationship with Bob Thompson that continued to provide the most profound satisfaction and the clearest evidence of how individual acts of kindness could create ripple effects far beyond their initial impact. Bob's transformation over the past 2 weeks had been remarkable to witness. The signing bonus that David Chen had provided had allowed him to secure a modest apartment in a neighborhood within walking distance of the hospital, ending months of uncertainty and discomfort that had taken a significant toll on both his physical and emotional well-being. Having a stable address and access to shower facilities had immediately improved his ability to present himself professionally, but the deeper changes went far beyond external appearances. Bob's new position with Chen Healthcare Group's facilities management company had provided him with not only job security, but also a sense of purpose and professional identity that had been missing from his life for far too long. His official title was Senior Environmental Services Specialist, and his responsibilities included training new custodial staff, developing cleaning protocols for specialized medical equipment, and serving as a liaison between facilities management and clinical departments to ensure that environmental services supported optimal patient care. The role perfectly matched Bob's combination of practical experience, attention to detail, and understanding of healthcare operations. He had thrown himself into the work with an enthusiasm that was evident to everyone who worked with him, and his colleagues quickly came to respect his expertise and his commitment to maintaining the highest standards of cleanliness and safety. More importantly, Bob's new position had restored his confidence and his sense of dignity. Emma had observed the gradual transformation in his posture, his speech, and his interactions with others as he regained his footing both professionally and personally. The man who had once eaten crackers alone in a supply closet now participated confidently in staff meetings, offered suggestions for improving hospital operations, and served as a mentor for other employees who were facing difficult circumstances. Emma's relationship with Bob had evolved as well, shifting from one based on immediate need to one grounded in mutual respect and shared commitment to improving the hospital environment for everyone who worked there or received care there. They had discovered that they shared similar perspectives on the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances, and Bob had become one of Emma's most valuable advisors as she developed programs and policies for her new role. It was during her second week as patient advocate that Emma encountered a situation that would test her new authority and demonstrate the potential impact of the systemic changes she was working to implement. A family had brought their concerns to her office regarding the treatment their elderly father had received during a recent hospitalization, and their complaint revealed problems that extended far beyond individual staff behavior to institutional policies and cultural attitudes. The patient, 73-year-old Miguel Santos, had been admitted to the medical unit following a fall that resulted in a hip fracture. His daughter, Rosa Santos, had contacted Emma's office because she was concerned about what she perceived as dismissive treatment from some of the medical staff and a lack of attention to her father's emotional and cultural needs during his recovery. Emma had scheduled a meeting with Rosa and her family to discuss their concerns in detail, and the conversation had revealed the complexity of providing culturally sensitive care in a diverse community. Miguel Santos spoke limited English and felt most comfortable communicating in Spanish, but several staff members had seemed frustrated by the need for interpretation services and had sometimes spoken about him as if he weren't present in the room. More troubling was Rosa's report that some staff members had made assumptions about her father's cognitive abilities based on his language barriers and his age, failing to recognize that he was a retired engineer who was fully capable of understanding his medical condition and participating in decisions about his care. The family felt that their father had been treated as an inconvenience rather than as a person deserving of respect and individualized attention. Emma had listened carefully to the family's concerns, taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions about specific incidents and interactions. She had then conducted her own investigation, reviewing medical records, speaking with staff members who had been involved in Miguel Santos's care, and observing interactions between healthcare providers and patients who required interpretation services. What she discovered was a pattern of unconscious bias and cultural insensitivity that was affecting the care provided to many patients, particularly those who were elderly, non-English speaking, or from minority communities. While no individual staff member was intentionally providing poor care, the cumulative effect of small oversights and assumptions was creating an environment where some patients felt devalued and marginalized. Emma had presented her findings to David Chen and the hospital's senior leadership team, recommending the development of comprehensive cultural competency training for all staff members and the implementation of policies that would ensure more respectful and individualized care for all patients, regardless of their background or circumstances. The leadership team had been initially skeptical about the need for additional training programs, particularly given the financial constraints that had recently resulted in budget cuts and layoffs. However, Emma had been able to demonstrate that improved patient satisfaction scores and reduced complaints could have significant financial benefits for the hospital, making the investment in cultural competency training a sound business decision as well as an ethical imperative. David Chen had supported Emma's recommendations enthusiastically, recognizing that the changes she proposed aligned perfectly with his vision for creating a healthcare system that truly served all members of the community with dignity and respect. He had authorized the development of a comprehensive training program that would be implemented throughout the Chen Healthcare Group network, using Riverside General as a pilot site for testing and refining the curriculum. Emma had worked closely with Bob Thompson to develop aspects of the training program that addressed the role of environmental services staff in creating a welcoming and respectful environment for patients and families. Bob's insights had been invaluable, particularly his understanding of how non-clinical staff members could contribute to positive patient experiences through their interactions and their attention to cultural sensitivity. The collaboration between Emma and Bob on the training program had demonstrated the power of bringing together perspectives from different levels of the hospital hierarchy to address complex challenges. Bob's practical experience and his understanding of the challenges faced by support staff had complemented Emma's clinical background and her new administrative responsibilities, creating a more comprehensive and effective approach to improving patient care. As the training program development progressed, Emma found herself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point in her career. 6 months earlier, she had been a bedside nurse, struggling to balance patient care responsibilities with her own financial pressures and family obligations. The decision to share her lunch with Bob Thompson had seemed like a simple act of kindness, but it had ultimately opened doors to opportunities she could never have imagined. The irony was not lost on Emma that her promotion to patient advocate had come about precisely because she had demonstrated the qualities that made her an exceptional bedside nurse. Her ability to see each person as an individual deserving of respect and compassion, her willingness to go beyond minimum requirements to meet people's needs, and her understanding that healthcare was fundamentally about human connections rather than just medical procedures, had all been skills she had developed through years of direct patient care. Emma's mother, Carmen, had been one of the first people to notice the positive changes in Emma's life, despite the cognitive challenges posed by her dementia. During Emma's recent visit to the memory care facility, Carmen had remarked that Emma seemed happier and more confident than she had in months, even though Carmen couldn't fully understand the details of Emma's new position. The conversation with her mother had reminded Emma of why her new role felt so meaningful. She was now in a position to ensure that other families wouldn't have to navigate the healthcare system without adequate support and advocacy, and she could work to prevent the kind of cultural insensitivity and institutional bias that too often affected vulnerable patients and their families. Emma's work with the Santos family had resulted in significant improvements to Miguel's care during the remainder of his hospitalization, and the family had expressed gratitude for having someone who took their concerns seriously and worked to address them systematically rather than dismissively. Miguel had been discharged to a rehabilitation facility with a comprehensive care plan that addressed both his medical needs and his cultural preferences, and his family felt confident that their voices had been heard and respected. The success of this case had demonstrated to hospital leadership the value of having a dedicated patient advocate, and Emma had received requests from other departments to help address similar concerns and develop policies that would prevent future problems. Her calendar was increasingly filled with meetings, training sessions, and consultation requests from staff members who were encountering complex patient care situations that required creative solutions. Despite the demands of her new role, Emma had made it a priority to maintain her connection to direct patient care by spending time each week on the pediatric floor where she had previously worked. These visits served multiple purposes. They helped her stay current with clinical practices and patient care challenges. They provided opportunities to observe the implementation of new policies and programs, and they reminded her of the fundamental mission that drove all of her work. During one of these visits, Emma had encountered Tommy Martinez, the 8-year-old patient she had cared for during her time as a bedside nurse. Tommy was back in the hospital for a follow-up procedure, and his mother, Sophia, had specifically requested that Emma be notified of his admission. The reunion had been emotional for all of them, with Tommy proudly showing Emma how well he had recovered from his previous surgery, and Sophia expressing gratitude for the care and support Emma had provided during their most difficult moments. The interaction had reinforced Emma's understanding of the lasting impact that healthcare providers could have on patients and families, even through brief encounters during times of crisis. It had also reminded her that her new role as patient advocate was ultimately about ensuring that every patient and family could experience the kind of compassionate, individualized care that she had always strived to provide as a bedside nurse. Bob Thompson had also maintained connections to his previous work environment, often stopping by the pediatric floor during his rounds to check on the cleanliness standards and to mentor newer environmental services staff members. His presence on the unit had been welcomed by the nursing staff, who appreciated his attention to detail and his understanding of the unique challenges involved in maintaining a safe environment for pediatric patients. Emma had observed that Bob's interactions with other hospital employees had changed significantly since his promotion to his new role. Previously, he had been largely invisible to many staff members, treated as part of the background rather than as a valued colleague. Now his expertise was recognized and respected, and he was frequently consulted on matters related to infection control, equipment maintenance, and facility safety. The transformation in Bob's professional status had also affected his personal life in positive ways. He had begun attending social events organized by hospital staff, had joined a community group focused on supporting people who had experienced homelessness, and had even started dating a social worker he had met through his advocacy work. The confidence and stability that had come with his new position had allowed him to rebuild social connections that had been lost during his most difficult period. Emma and Bob had collaborated on several initiatives designed to improve working conditions and job satisfaction for hospital support staff. They had worked together to develop a recognition program that would acknowledge the contributions of environmental services, dietary and maintenance workers who often felt undervalued despite the essential nature of their work. They had also advocated for improved breakroom facilities and more flexible scheduling options for employees with transportation challenges or family responsibilities. These efforts had been well received by hospital administration and had resulted in measurable improvements in employee satisfaction scores and retention rates among support staff. The success of these programs had attracted attention from other hospitals within the Chen Healthcare Group network, and Emma and Bob had been invited to present their initiatives at a regional conference focused on healthcare workplace culture. The conference presentation had been a significant milestone for both Emma and Bob, representing their emergence as recognized leaders in healthcare administration and employee advocacy. Emma had spoken about the importance of creating institutional cultures that supported both patient care and employee well-being, while Bob had shared his personal story and his insights about the challenges faced by support staff in healthcare settings. The audience response had been overwhelmingly positive, with conference attendees expressing interest in implementing similar programs at their own facilities. Several hospital administrators had approached Emma and Bob after their presentation to discuss potential consulting opportunities, opening up possibilities for them to expand their impact beyond Riverside General Hospital. David Chen had attended the conference presentation and had expressed pride in the work that Emma and Bob had accomplished in such a short time. He had also announced his intention to expand the patient advocacy program to all hospitals within the Chen Healthcare Group network, with Emma serving as the director of system-wide patient advocacy initiatives. The promotion would involve additional responsibilities and travel to other facilities, but it would also provide Emma with the opportunity to implement the programs and policies she had developed on a much larger scale. She would be working with thousands of employees and serving hundreds of thousands of patients and families throughout the Midwest region, multiplying the impact of the compassion and advocacy that had begun with sharing a simple lunch. As Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, she was struck by the power of small acts of kindness to create transformative change. Her decision to offer Bob Thompson a sandwich had been motivated by basic human compassion, but it had ultimately led to opportunities for both of them to make a meaningful difference in the lives of countless other people. The story of their friendship and professional collaboration had become something of a legend within Riverside General Hospital, inspiring other employees to look for ways to support their colleagues and to recognize the value of treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or circumstances. The culture of the hospital had shifted noticeably, with staff members more likely to offer assistance to colleagues who were struggling and more conscious of the ways that their individual actions contributed to the overall patient experience. Emma's lunch-sharing tradition had also continued, though it had evolved to include other employees who were facing temporary hardships. She had established an informal network of staff members who contributed food, resources, and emotional support to colleagues in need, creating a safety net that helped prevent the kind of crisis that Bob had experienced from devastating other employees. The network had grown to include not just hospital employees, but also patients and families who had been touched by the culture of compassion that Emma and Bob had helped to create. Former patients often returned to volunteer in the hospital, and several families had established small scholarship funds to help hospital employees pursue continuing education opportunities. Bob Thompson had become a mentor figure for other employees who were facing personal challenges, offering practical advice and emotional support based on his own experience of overcoming homelessness and job insecurity. He had also become involved in community organizations that worked to prevent homelessness and to support people who were transitioning back to stable housing and employment. The impact of their story had extended beyond Riverside General Hospital to influence policies and practices throughout the Chen Healthcare Group network. David Chen had implemented system-wide initiatives based on the programs that Emma and Bob had developed, creating employee assistance programs, cultural competency training, and patient advocacy services at all of the organization's facilities. The financial benefits of these programs had been significant, with measurable improvements in patient satisfaction scores, employee retention rates, and overall operational efficiency. However, David Chen was most proud of the cultural transformation that had occurred, with the organization becoming known for its commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. As Emma prepared to begin her expanded role as system-wide director of patient advocacy, she found herself thinking about the lunch she had packed that morning. It was a simple turkey sandwich, an apple, and a small bag of pretzels, much like the lunch she had shared with Bob Thompson on that first day when everything had changed. The difference was that she now understood the profound impact that simple acts of kindness could have when they were supported by institutional commitment and systemic change. Emma had learned that true healthcare leadership wasn't about having the most advanced medical technology or the most efficient operational systems, though those things were certainly important. Instead, it was about creating environments where every person, whether they were a patient, a family member, or an employee, could feel valued and respected as a unique individual deserving of compassionate care. The story of Emma Rodriguez and Bob Thompson had become a testament to the power of human connection to transform not just individual lives, but entire organizations and communities. It had demonstrated that sometimes the most important changes begin with the smallest gestures, and that kindness, when it is genuine and sustained, has the power to create ripple effects that extend far beyond what anyone could imagine. As Emma walked through the corridors of Riverside General Hospital on her way to another meeting about expanding patient advocacy services, she carried with her the knowledge that every interaction was an opportunity to make a positive difference in someone's life. She had learned that being a healthcare provider meant more than treating medical conditions. It meant treating people with the dignity and compassion that every human being deserved. The simple brown paper bag lunch that had started it all had taught Emma and Bob that sometimes the most profound changes in the world begin with one person deciding to see another person's needs and respond with kindness. Their story had become proof that when organizations support and amplify individual acts of compassion, they can create cultures of caring that transform not just institutions, but entire communities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.